It was nearly midnight when Sarah finally managed to sink into bed after a long, exhausting day. Her two kids, Emma and Jacob, had gone to bed hours earlier, and the house was completely silent. She pulled the blanket over herself, comforted by the thought that her children were safe and sound in their rooms. But then a faint knock echoed down the hallway. At first, Sarah thought she was imagining it. She sat up, straining her ears. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, right on her children's bedroom door. Her heart skipped. She knew Emma and Jacob were asleep. They never got up this late. Sarah grabbed her phone, its screen casting a pale glow as she walked cautiously down the hallway. The air felt colder with every step. When she reached the kids' room, she saw the door slightly ajar. She whispered, "Emma? Jacob?" But no answer came. Pushing the door gently, she peeked inside. Both children were sound asleep in their beds. Their soft breathing filled the room, completely undisturbed. Chills ran down Sarah's spine. If her kids were sleeping, then who, or what, was knocking? She glanced around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. She turned back toward the door and froze. There, just visible under the hallway's dim light, were faint fingerprints smeared across the wood of the door, too high for a child to reach. Her pulse quickened. She shut the door quietly, pressed her back against the wall, and listened. Silence. Then, 3 sharp knocks thundered behind her, as though something unseen wanted to be let in. Terrified, Sarah clutched her phone, debating whether to scream, wake her children, or call the police. But one horrifying thought echoed in her mind. If the knocking wasn't her kids, then someone else was in the house. The night was calm, and Sarah moved quietly through the house before heading to bed. As she passed her children's room, she peeked in one last time. Emma and Jacob were tucked in tightly under their warm blankets, their little faces peaceful in sleep. A mother's comfort washed over her, knowing her kids were safe. But less than 10 minutes later, Sarah's sense of peace shattered. While grabbing a glass of water from the kitchen, she noticed a strange draft in the air. Following it back toward the hallway, her eyes fell on the children's bedroom door, slightly ajar. Confused, she pushed the door open. Her heart skipped. Both Emma and Jacob were still sound asleep, but their blankets were gone. They lay uncovered, their small bodies shivering in the cold air. Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor, where both blankets lay crumpled in a heap, far from the bed, as if ripped away deliberately. A chill ran down her spine. She carefully covered her kids again, whispering, "It's all right, Mommy's here." But then her eyes shifted to the window. It was open, just a crack, but wide enough to let in the night air. Sarah was certain she had closed it earlier. She hurried to lock it, but something outside caught her eye. The faint impression of small handprints smeared across the glass. Not Emma's, not Jacob's. They were too large. Her breathing grew shaky. As she turned to leave, a sound made her freeze. The blanket she had just tucked tightly over her children slid down once more, slowly, as if invisible hands were peeling them away. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, but her children remained undisturbed, sleeping peacefully as though nothing was wrong. Only she could see it, the blankets moving, the air shifting, the unseen presence playing a terrifying game in the room. Her final thought before stumbling backward was the most chilling of all. If something could take away their blankets, what else could it take? It was nearly 1 a.m. when Sarah stirred awake, uneasy without knowing why. The house was silent, except for the faint crackle of the baby monitor sitting on her nightstand. She leaned over, checking the tiny screen. Both Emma and Jacob were fast asleep, their chests rising and falling in calm rhythm. Relieved, she almost drifted back to sleep until she heard it. A voice, not her children's, not hers. A low, gravelly whisper hissed through the monitor, so faint she thought it might be static at first. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Don't wake them." Sarah's blood ran cold. She bolted upright, staring at the monitor. The camera still showed her kids, peacefully asleep in their beds. No movement, no one else in sight. Her trembling fingers adjusted the volume. The voice returned, this time harsher, broken with static. They're mine. Heart pounding, Sarah grabbed her phone and crept down the hallway. Every step felt heavier, the air thicker. She reached the children's door, hesitating before pushing it open. The monitor in her hand still buzzed faintly with static. Inside, the room looked untouched. Emma clutched her stuffed animal. Jacob snored softly. Nothing seemed out of place. Sarah let out a shaky breath until the monitor in her hand crackled louder. On the tiny screen, a shadow moved across the room. But when she looked up with her own eyes, nothing. She felt the blood drain from her face. Slowly, almost defiantly, the whisper hissed one last time through the speaker, "Behind you." Sarah spun around, but the hallway was empty. The silence that followed was worse than the whisper itself, pressing down on her chest like a weight. And deep inside, she knew the truth. Whatever spoke through the monitor wasn't outside. It was already inside her home. The house was quiet, wrapped in midnight stillness. Sarah sat in the living room, scrolling her phone when she heard a faint creak. At first, she thought it was the old wooden floorboards settling. But then she noticed something odd, the soft sound of footsteps moving slowly down the hallway. Her heart skipped. She froze, straining to listen. Gathering her courage, Sarah rose and tiptoed toward the sound. The hallway stretched long and dim, the only light spilling faintly from the night light outside her children's room. That's when she saw them. Muddy footprints smeared across the wooden floor. They led directly toward Emma and Jacob's bedroom. Her breath hitched. She had locked every door. How could anyone have gotten inside? Carefully, she followed the trail until she reached the bedroom door. It was wide open. Inside, Emma and Jacob lay peacefully asleep, their blankets pulled snug around them. But the footprints didn't stop at the door. They continued into the room. Sarah's eyes darted across the floor, following the dirty prints until they vanished right beside her children's beds. She swallowed hard, her body trembling. Someone had been standing there, watching them. She glanced around the room in a panic, but no one was there. The closet door was shut, the window sealed, the curtains still. Everything appeared normal, too normal. Stepping back, Sarah tried to convince herself she was imagining things. But when she turned toward the hallway again, her blood froze. The muddy footprints, they were fresh, damp. The mud was still glistening as if the intruder had just walked through moments ago. And yet the silence around her was unbearable, thick, suffocating, alive. Sarah knew then that she wasn't alone in the house. Someone, or something, had come inside without a sound. And worse, it hadn't left. At exactly 2 a.m., Sarah woke with a start. A chill ran through the room, so sharp it raised goosebumps along her arms. She pulled her blanket tighter, but quickly realized the cold wasn't coming from her own room. It was drifting in from down the hallway. She slipped out of bed and crept toward her children's room. The air grew colder with each step, like walking into the middle of winter. When she reached the door, her stomach twisted. The upstairs window, the one she always made sure to lock, was wide open. Pale moonlight poured inside, casting long shadows across the floor. Her kids, Emma and Jacob, lay fast asleep in their beds. Their breath puffed out in tiny clouds in the freezing air. Sarah hurried to the window, her hands trembling as she pushed it shut. That's when she noticed the marks. On the outside of the glass were streaks, like greasy fingerprints. Some pressed against the pane, others dragging downward, as though someone had been climbing or leaning in. Her pulse quickened. She whispered to herself, "No, no, that's not possible." She turned to check on her children again, but something made her freeze. The curtains, though still, cast an unfamiliar shadow across the floor, long, distorted, humanoid. She spun toward the wall, but no figure was there. Then, from outside, came the faint creak of wood, the sound of weight shifting on the roof above. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would wake the kids. She pulled them closer under their blankets, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy's here." But her own voice shook with terror. And as the house fell silent again, Sarah realized the open window wasn't the scariest part. The real horror was that whatever had pushed it open was still somewhere outside, waiting. Sarah had finally drifted into a light sleep when the sound of electricity buzzing startled her awake. At first, she thought it was just a dream, but then the faint flicker of light caught her eye from under the door. Her children's bedroom. She sat up quickly, her chest tight. Emma and Jacob always slept with a small night light, steady, soft, comforting. But tonight, it wasn't steady. The glow pulsed and flickered, like a light struggling to stay alive. Grabbing her phone, Sarah hurried down the hallway. With every step, the flickering grew harsher, strobing faintly against the walls. She pushed the door open, whispering their names. The sight made her freeze. Both children were sound asleep, their faces calm. But the room's ceiling light was turning on and off by itself in short bursts. Each time it flickered, Sarah caught glimpses of something in the corner, tall, dark, and impossibly still. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, and the figure was gone. The light steadied for a moment, and she almost convinced herself it was a trick of her imagination. But then the bulb began to pulse again, this time faster. Emma stirred in her bed, letting out a soft whimper, but did not wake. The shadows stretched unnaturally with every flash. For a fraction of a second, Sarah saw it again. The figure closer, leaning toward the bed. Panicked, Sarah rushed to the switch and shut the light off completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Only her phone's faint glow lit her shaking hands. She turned the flashlight on, sweeping it across the room. Empty. Nothing. Just her children breathing softly. But as she exhaled in shaky relief, her phone flickered too, its screen cutting in and out, before a voice hissed through the silence. "You can't turn off the dark." The night was unusually still. Sarah had just finished checking the locks downstairs and decided to look in on Emma and Jacob before heading to bed herself. She pushed their door open softly, smiling at the sight of her children sound asleep under their blankets. But her smile quickly faded. On the far wall, stretched across the pale wallpaper, was a tall, distorted shadow. It loomed over the children's beds, broad shoulders, elongated arms, and a head tilted unnaturally to the side. Sarah's breath caught. She turned her head toward the doorway, half expecting to see someone standing behind her, but the hallway was empty. She looked back. The shadow was still there, darker than before, reaching closer to the children. Her heart hammered. She stepped into the room, her voice trembling. "Emma, Jacob," but they didn't stir. They slept soundly, unaware of the figure looming above them. Sarah's phone flashlight cut through the dark as she shone it toward the wall. For a brief moment, the shadow vanished. The wall was bare again. Relief washed over her until the light flickered. The shadow returned, even clearer. This time, it wasn't on the wall. It was standing just beside the bed, leaning over Emma. Sarah's scream caught in her throat. She lunged forward, grabbing Emma and Jacob's blankets, pulling them closer. The shadow twisted unnaturally, stretching along the wall as if alive. She backed away, clutching her children, her hands shaking violently. The figure didn't move toward her, but its head slowly turned, as if acknowledging her presence. Then, in one horrifying instant, the shadow raised its hand, not toward the children, but toward her. Sarah stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut, her children in her arms. The last image burned in her mind, the shadow's hand still reaching, stretching, as if it wanted to follow her into the dark. It was nearly 2:30 a.m. when Sarah woke up thirsty. She headed downstairs quietly so she wouldn't wake Emma and Jacob. The kitchen was dark, but as she poured herself a glass of water, something odd caught her attention, the faint sound of creaking hinges. Her pulse quickened. She set the glass down and followed the sound. It came from the back of the house. When she reached the back door, her stomach turned cold. The door stood wide open, swaying slightly with the night breeze. Sarah froze. She remembered locking it before bed. She always locked every door. Her hands shook as she stepped closer. That's when she noticed muddy shoe prints on the porch. Large, heavy prints leading into the house. Her heart pounded. She whispered, "Oh, God," and turned quickly, glancing into the living room. Empty, silent. Yet she could feel it. Someone had been inside. Maybe still was. She rushed upstairs, her only thought to protect her children. When she reached their room, she found Emma and Jacob asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger. But as she turned to shut the door behind her, her eyes fell on something that made her knees weaken. By the doorway lay a pair of wet footprints, fresh, glistening under the hallway light. They stopped just a few feet from the children's beds and then vanished. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the doorknob, her breath uneven. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but fear kept her silent. Whoever had walked in through the unlocked back door hadn't left muddy prints back outside. The footprints ended inside her house, which meant whoever was still there, watching. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, when a soft sound drifted through the air. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then it grew clearer. A lullaby. Not just any lullaby. It was the same old tune her grandmother used to hum when Sarah was a child. The haunting melody floated through the hallway, carrying with it a chill that sank deep into her chest. Confused, Sarah sat up and grabbed her phone. The sound was coming from Emma and Jacob's room. She crept toward the door, heart thudding louder with each step. As she pushed the door open, the melody grew stronger. Both children were asleep, their small faces calm, rising and falling with steady breaths. Yet the lullaby continued, soft, eerie, echoing as though someone invisible stood right beside their beds, singing them to sleep. Sarah's throat went dry. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The singing stopped instantly. The room plunged back into silence. Sarah clutched her phone tighter, scanning every corner of the room, but it was empty. Just her children sleeping peacefully. She was about to leave when Emma stirred and mumbled in her sleep. Sarah leaned closer, hoping it was nothing. But Emma's lips parted, and in a voice not her own, she softly whispered the rest of the lullaby's verse. Sarah's knees buckled. Emma had never heard that song before. Sarah hadn't sung it in years. Suddenly, from the darkest corner of the room, the lullaby began again, this time lower, slower, wrapping the room in a suffocating weight. Sarah grabbed her children, pulling them close, her heart racing. The last line of the song echoed into her ears. "Sleep, little one, you're never alone." Every night, without fail, Jacob slept with his favorite toy, a small stuffed bear that never left his side. Sarah always found comfort in that simple routine. It was proof her children were safe, tucked in, and surrounded by familiar warmth. But tonight, something was different. As Sarah peeked into the room before bed, she noticed Jacob stirring uneasily in his sleep. When she looked closer, her chest tightened. The stuffed bear wasn't there. His little hand, usually wrapped tightly around it, clutched only the blanket. Her first thought was simple. It must have fallen. She checked the floor, the sheets under the bed. Nothing. The bear was gone. Confused, she whispered to herself, "I know he had it when he fell asleep." She distinctly remembered tucking it into his arms. Her unease grew. She searched the hallway, the living room, even a laundry basket. Still nothing. Finally, with her heart pounding, she climbed up toward the attic. The old wooden ladder groaned as she pulled it down. Dust swirled in the air as she climbed. The attic was cold, filled with forgotten boxes and broken furniture. And then she saw it. In the far corner, on an old rocking chair that creaked softly on its own, sat Jacob's stuffed bear. Its button eyes stared blankly, its stitched smile crooked in the moonlight seeping through the attic window. Sarah's breath caught. She stepped closer, but the chair rocked harder, as if pushed by unseen hands. Her phone slipped in her trembling grip. She whispered, How did it get here?" The attic seemed to grow darker, and just as she reached for the toy, The bear tipped forward, falling onto the floor, its head turning toward her as though it had been waiting all along.